This week, we'll be observing what for some is their favorite holiday of the year. No, I'm not referring to Ash Wednesday, but the one that comes the night before, Mardi Gras. Ash Wednesday is the traditional beginning of that somber and reflective season of Lent. Ancient, way back. And we go about Lent a lot differently than did our forebears, but we still remember. Mardi Gras grew up as a response to Ash Wednesday, and it's like, if we're going to have to go a whole season, 6 weeks of fasting and of cutting back and of saying no, let's have a big blowout party first. And there we go. That's how Mardi Gras got its start. So Ash Wednesday came first, but Mardi Gras probably gets a lot more national attention, thanks in large part to our friends down in New Orleans, who really put on quite a show. And on the surface, it seems much more interesting than being anointed with ashes. Now, a good party has its place. We all need a time to celebrate, to have some fun, to let off some steam, to sort of realign our inner compass. It can be very therapeutic to laugh and dance and sing, but not as an end in and of itself, not as a lifestyle choice. Well, then, what is it for? As far as I go, it's part of the recipe of a more wholesome life. Partying all the time leads nowhere, but working all the time without taking time to feast, to celebrate. Even in the religious traditions, festivals are built in because we know that we could work hard all the time and squeeze the fun out of life and lose our perspective. Some would rather switch it around, however, and live a Mardi Gras kind of life, and they totally miss the truth that Ash Wednesday and the season of Lent seek to point out. The narrow gate to which Jesus referred is never more present to us than during this season of Lent. When we were in Athol, the high school principal there was named Dick Smith, and he ran a tight ship. The school had high morale because he was tough and he was fair. He wasn't a big guy, but he was big inside. He knew who he was, and he was fearless. Students and faculty trusted and respected him. In his wisdom, he allowed something like what I would call a Mardi Gras experience one day of the year. You could wear outlandish clothing to school. Teachers would put on a skit mocking themselves and even him. The students had permission to take shots at teachers and administrators in a drama of their own, and they did it with gusto. And the crowning glory, this is all in the gymnasium, so surrounded by people, the tough principal would sit in a chair and 3 students would get to push a cream pie in his face. And so since this was in the gym, of course, everybody just erupted with laughter. But it ended. It was a cathartic experience, but it ended when the bell rang that afternoon. Nobody, student or teacher, was stupid enough to come to school the next day and to try to push a cream face in Mr. Smith's face, a cream pie in his face. No. If they did, they'd be breaking rocks on a chain gang somewhere. Why? Just the difference of a day. Well, it was very clear. You come to this school to learn, and this kind of fun thing fits in. The tail is not gonna wag the dog, but we have to have a little fun along the way. Brilliant move for a tough guy. If I came in here this morning telling you that I had 50 tickets for a charter jet to take 50 people to Orlando and that it included, a week down in Disney World, I bet you I could sell all 50 before the day was over. Maybe not just here, but somewhere, because a blizzard like this has a way of making people think, man, I would love to get out of here. I was just talking to Jane Barrett, and Ricky is down in Florida working with Ken Nutting on a truck. What timing? And my daughter Lynn's in Dallas flying in tonight. I'm not even going to go visit her. I don't want to hear about how nice it was there. It hurts. But we all know how easy it is sometimes just to get away for a while in the middle of winter and how refreshing it can be. It's good stuff. But a trip to Orlando can be a dangerous trip. Let me tell you somebody else's perspective. Father Richard Rohr had been down in Orlando to give a conference, and he was flying out of Orlando. And on board the plane, before it left, it was a madhouse. Kids running and screaming and just completely out of control. He said, I stopped the flight attendant and I asked, what's going on? She said, this was always the worst flight of the entire week. The crew hated it. These kids have been at Disney for a whole week and have had all their fantasies indulged. They get to see all the characters, they go on all the rides, they eat sweet and tasty food all week long, and their families have spent big money on this trip, have gone to the trouble of taking time off work, and they really try to pack everything in. It's full speed for a whole week of just one stimulating activity after another. But think about it, he said, a plane full of kids that have been overstimulated and overindulged night and day, and then you toss in the sugar. Then suddenly, it's all over. Sit down, put your seatbelt in, behave. No running down the aisles, no fooling around, no more Mickey, no more rides. It's a prescription for disaster, and tantrums abound. And no wonder the flight attendants hate it. They can't wait to get down the other end. And Rohr says, what we have there is out-of-control egos. The kids just can't adjust from overindulged fantasies, on one hand, to going home again, to the normal everyday routine, going back to school, doing their chores, doing homework. They think that living in Disney World will be the closest thing they could think of to going to heaven. And of course, a lot of adults feel the same way, whether it be Disney World, Las Vegas, or some other place you can fill in that is expert at catering to your fantasies and your needs. They have been seduced into believing that it's all about them, that the fantasy will just continue. And that's all the ego needs, says Rohr. It swallows it hook, line, and sinker. Why can't I live like this all the time? Disney has perfected the art of fulfilling fantasies, and we love it. Then he gets serious, and this is where he talks about where we are now. Jesus, he said, instead, is the broken one. He points to a very different path. He tells us that his way is the way that leads to real freedom, whereas we really want the fantasy to be true so often, because it feels so good when it's happening. And I speak as a fellow sufferer, been to Disney, and it's like, I didn't know a place like this existed. We live in a Disney world in many ways, but we follow the wounded one, Jesus. It comes down to a matter of knowing where you go for a break and where do you go for life. And Jesus is clearly indicating that it's a matter of choice. We have tremendous freedom to choose. Choosing the narrower way of self-imposed restrictions is the one that leads to life. He knows how easy it is to get lost in the fantasies and miss the truth. In the old TV series Kung Fu, some of you know, I'm a fan, Master Po instructs his young student, grasshopper, always be yourself. Then when people see you as you really are, you won't feel the need to hide. People spend so much time trying to disguise who they really are. Be yourself. Now, Master Po is talking not about, being some self-imposed self, but being your true self. Be authentic. Be your truest core self. And that strikes me as what Jesus is talking about when he mentions the narrow gate. It's harder, but it isn't morbid. It leads to life, but it goes by a paradoxical pathway. Someone could say that they want to live in Disneyland for the rest of their lives because that's where they feel like they're really themselves, having fun, living out a fantasy. Wrong. That's the false self, the superficial self. It's fun to go for a while, but to live like that forever is unrealistic in terms of our expectation. It's easy for us to get confused about which self is our truest nature. In an affluent culture like ours, people can afford to avoid the narrow path all the time. We have so many options open to us. And so it takes incredible effort and discipline to be our most authentic self. because being something much less can be so much fun. This is the underlying dynamic of all addictions. Quote, I like the way I feel when I'm doing these things, when I have a drink, or when I gamble, or whatever. And I want to feel like this all the time. So much waste, so much suffering is caused by that kind of addiction. A young man named Ben Breedlove was born with a serious heart defect and came close to dying several times in his young life. He recalls one dramatic occasion when he was 12 years old, and he was on a gurney being rushed to the OR in an attempt to save his life. His mother was trotting along beside. He looked up and he saw a vision of what he would describe as heavenly beauty and light. He was overcome with joy, and he told his mom, Mom, look up, look at the ceiling, look at heaven. And she, of course, looked up and saw nothing. It was his vision. This is how he described it. He said, I was so happy, I wanted to go there. I didn't want to come back. But then I got the clear sense that I had to come back, that I wasn't done here yet. And so the doctors miraculously saved his life. And he lived for another 5 years, but then died suddenly on Christmas Day 2 years ago, 2011, at the age of 17. For him, that experience was something sacred that changed his whole perspective on life. It wasn't a fantasy, an invitation to escape his painful reality. When he got well enough to go home, he was able to live with more purpose and understanding because that experience fed him. He left a video of his journey that touches anyone who sees it, and if you're interested, just check on YouTube online and just put in Ben Breedlove, and it's there. Having come so close to death and the source of life, he was no longer afraid of dying or of living. He still lived in a Mardi Gras world and felt its temptations, as do we all, but he wasn't seduced by the false promises. He knew who he was, and he understood from his own experience about the narrow gate. He wouldn't suggest that he wished everybody could have near-death experiences, but boy, that can sure hurry up the process of understanding which gate to choose. I'd like to conclude with a poem we all know well by a New England personality now passed on, Robert Frost. His famous poem, The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I marked the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Perhaps you have plans to head out to Disney World or some other exotic place during February vacation. Blessings on you. If you need a chaplain, call me. I'd be happy to come. We all need a nice break. It's nice to get into warm weather in winters like this. Enjoy yourself, but just don't forget to come home. Your own unique path to life awaits you here. Amen and amen.